How's everybody doing out there? Today's video is entitled The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and we're going to cover the gigging of vintage drum sets with my absolute daily driver, my favorite drum set. There we go, guys. That's a 1960 Ludwig drum set with the transition badges. Let's get started. Hey, so how's everyone doing? All right, guys, so let's talk about the good before we talk about the bad, and then we'll talk about the ugly. All right, guys, so the good about gigging with a vintage drum set is as follows. For one, they're just gorgeous, and if you are at a gig and somebody knows, or they can appreciate that for the fact that this is a vintage drum set. Now, this one is a 1960 Ludwig transition era drum set. It is a 13 by 20 by a 22 and a 16, and then the matching snare drum over here. This drum set I found at Sam Ash in Hollywood. It was in pretty rough shape. The floor tom was just wrecked, so much so that I ended up having to rewrap that one, obviously using wrap from Precision Drum. My buddy wrapped that one for me, and it looks phenomenal. Bob from On the Edge Drums, if you guys ever get a chance, or in Cali. For heads, I'm using the Aquarian vintage mediums, and then underneath I'm using the Aquarian modern vintage thins. So this would be something to the effect of an ambassador, and underneath more of a diplomat. And that's my setup. On top of this one, I have a Remo, which eventually I'll be switching out for an Aquarian as well. And then I have Remo in the back of my bass drum, and I believe this is an Aquarian in the front, if I remember correctly. And then obviously with the felt strip going all the way down. So once again, guys, it's obviously a beautiful drum set. Everything on here is nickel over brass. All the heads are. One way you can tell, you can take a magnet to these and they'll just fall off. If they are chrome over brass, the magnet won't stick. So another cool thing about this drum set, it has a WFL claws, which make it, for guys like me that really dig these vintage drums, little accents like that just make it super cool. Obviously, I am a left-handed drummer, so the way these all drum kits come set up for right-handed people, it's obviously no good to me, so I have to make slight modifications so that I can play them. So once again, the good is that these are the very sought after poplar mahogany shells, 3-ply, super thin. The workmanship on these, anything prior to 64, the workmanship on WFL or Ludwig are going to be way above what came after 64, and that's simply due to the fact that after the Beatles were showcased on the Ed Sullivan Show, production got so hard and heavy and fast that the QA wasn't the best, and that's once again pretty well known in regards to Ludwig. So they're going to be a great conversation piece. They sound amazing. They tune up really easily, and they sound fantastic, especially if you're going to play period music. Once again, if you were to buy this, if you were to go to Ludwig and purchase the equivalent of this drum kit, well, be above like $35,000 to $4,000 to get their new version of these, which I believe are called the Legacy Mahogany. That's what these would be in today's day and age, and you have to pay a heavy premium. These legs are super vintagey with the WFL legs, right? What I love about these is when you're done gigging, you can just pull this little thing down, and as you can see, it'll collapse. But the best thing about that is you don't have to remove them. You can go right into your gig bag with those, which makes setup so much easier because you just collapse the legs. The bad For the snare, the good is it tunes really easily due to the chrome over brass shells. It has a great sound when you do the cross sticking. There's a really nice defined, really bright sound. It cuts through. On these, the design underneath on these snares was really cool. It's a 14-inch snare, but the strands are over 14 inches, and they would bolt on over here. So when you release it, it would just, it's just a better design. The snares engage, and it's just better than most. Another cool thing is you don't really have to use gels, because you can just engage the mufflers. It takes some getting used to so that you can actually work them correctly and, you know, use, but once you get the hang of them, they're super cool. For those that are right-handed, you can use the tab over here and slide it up onto here. So if you were a right-handed drummer, like most of you are, you just do this and then hang it off of that tab right there, and you can play. If you're a right-handed drummer. So those would be the good, right? There's a lot of good there. The bad. The bad. I've had these and I've played them outdoors on very, very hot days, like hot summer days. We do a lot of concerts in the park for the city. And the problem with these is if you leave them in your gig bag and you tune them when you get on site, which you should be doing anyway, you have to retune them again, because due to the heat, they will go out of tune. Not horribly out of tune, but they do go out of tune, so you just have to make sure you're on it with your tuning. So I would definitely say that's the bad. For the floor tom itself, the bad on the rack tom is just I would just simply say that although this is cool, looks awesome, I'd rather put it on a basket like I have mine set up over here. Once again, I'm a left-handed drummer, so when you set it up on the basket, I just don't trust it. Depending, even, you know, and a lot of you guys I'm assuming are very heavy hitters. I'm not a very heavy hitter, but it just seems like over time you would just damage the wood maybe, and it's just not, you just can't, it's not as articulate. You can't really set that up and like you can with today's hardware. Okay, so once again, it's always just easier to take it and set on your basket, and there you go. You're ready to rock and roll. Let's see, the bad about the bass drum. Man, I would honestly say that because these are older, and this design over here for what they call the gold wing was very rudimentary. So over the years, that piece of folded metal, that bracket there, tends to warp. So when I first got the kit, I had to like pull it off and hammer it back into shape so that it would clamp tightly around the spur itself and not move. I also ended up having to, just for extra measure, I used one of these old school deals, I don't even know what it's called, so that I can make sure that thing stays anchored, because there's nothing worse than your bass drum like walking away from you when you're playing, right? For the snare, I wouldn't say there's a bad or an ugly. It goes on the snare stand, it holds its tuning really well, and it does a great job. Now, guys, the ugly. Man, I hate to say it, but the ugly part. And, you know, this is my favorite drum kit. This is the one I've gigged the most, the one that's, you know, gone all over with me. Obviously, I don't usually play that snare drum with it because I think it looks kind of dorky myself when you play a full kit that matches. you have to be very careful with them because they're vintage and they're old. This kit is from 1960, so it's 64 years old. So obviously you just have to be a little bit more careful because you cannot replace it, you know, and obviously thievery is always something that we have to watch out for. So with these vintage kits, and that's all I play out, you just have to be a lot more methodical with where you place them, where you leave them, because once again, like I said, if they walk away, you know, there's no way in hell that you're going to be able to replace them, or, you know, so you have to just consider them a loss. Another thing that makes them, like, I guess I would say the ugly, when you first get them, you have to obviously go through them, make sure that the bearing edges are good, because a lot of times they'll be chewed up. You have to make sure that the wrap is tight. If not, you have to do those repairs. You have to make sure that all your hardware is in good working order. And let's be honest, modern hardware is a million times better than the vintage stuff, so that would be a bad one as well. Sometimes these kits, when you do get them and you do start gigging them, you find these little flaws where they, you know, like I said before, they might start walking on you. And I've had vintage drums where the ugly was that the stirrups weren't placed correctly in there, so I had to like fabricate or find much longer stirrups in order to get them to work, because it just, you know, the shell would sit on the floor, which is not a good thing. I don't like my drum shell sitting on the floor. So that's an ugly one that you have to be careful with vintage kits. Two is the fact that you have to be willing to use a mix of the old and the new hardware in order to make everything work. Because let's be honest, the snare stands for these old drum sets are absolutely terrible. People use them just so they can say everything is period correct, but in the end, if you're gigging, if you're going out, it's got to make sense, right? So as a whole, the ugly on these drum sets is that you do have to be a lot more methodical before you take them out. You do have to kick the tires on them. You do have to make sure that everything's in good working order, because it is, once again, older and it can fail. With these, obviously these legs, as you can see, it rattles. It doesn't bother me during gigs, but I know that these legs by design aren't going to be as sturdy as the later ones that, you know, bolt down. These were spring lock, so anything with a spring is always going to have movement. So that I would definitely call that an ugly. Just have to be sure that everything on there is tight and set up correctly. If you think it's something that you're just going to buy and gig, you can, but you're going to end up with a couple fails here and there. So once again, that was the good, the bad, and the ugly.